This tutorial is going to cover creating the sleeping dog in front of a fan. Now you may have a drawing that you want to introduce using a free image plane, but I'm going to just wing this using a polygon sphere to start with. So I'll go to one of my orthographic views, hold down the space bar, go to create polygon primitive sphere, and drag it. Go to my perspective view, and I'm going to go to the inputs for polysphere, and I'm going to drop the axis height and width to 10. And now I'm going to give it a bit of a length to start out with, getting the length of the body of the dog I want to create. Now I'm going to start to separate out the head from the body, and I'm going to use my edge loop tool to do that. So I'll click on my edge loop tool, and I'll decide where I'd like the head to begin from. Insert an edge, and I'll scale it in a bit. I want the dog to appear as if it's kind of lying down, so maybe I'll start to edit some of the vertices on the bottom and pull them up so the dog appears to be lying on a surface. I'll go back to my object mode, and I'll just move it up a bit. I'll go into one of my side views. I'll get the vertex, and I'll select through. I'll probably hit B on the keyboard so I can start to use the soft select. And I think maybe I want a little bit more of a selection of the vertices, so I'll double click on the move tool, open up soft select, and I'll just bump the number up a bit. And then I'll start to pull these up, just to get it started in the general area the way I'd like it to be. I'm going to go back to my perspective view. I'm going to hit 3 on the keyboard just to see what the proxy will give me, so I know just how far to go with adding new geometry. I'll go back to 1, and I'm going to go to edge, and I think I'll select this edge. I'll take off my soft select, and I think I'll scale it up a bit. I'm going to start working on the snout, so I'll grab the tip, and now I'm going to select those faces by right-clicking and choosing face. I'll grab the series that comprise that cone shape at the end, and I'll click on my extrude tool, directing it straight out, and I'll pull out the beginnings of the snout. I'm going to hit 3 on the keyboard again. So you can see we're starting to develop something that will look like a dog when we're done. And this is very subjective, so it's really up to you. The girth or the fatness and the length of this dog is really up to your own design. I'm going to do a little bit more customizing of this shape before I actually introduce the limbs to it. And now that I have something that I might want, I'll add a little more geometry here. And I'm going to go to my side view of the model once again. I'm going to start to move some of these vertices down a little bit lower. So I'll go to vertex. In this case, it's easy to move the bottom edge up because it's relatively flat because the dog is lying down. So once again, I'll start to grab some series of these. Maybe I'll hit B on the keyboard to go to soft select, and I'll move them up a bit. And I'll grab the snout, move that down. So it really is a real custom approach to this. I'll go to my perspective view, I'll hit 3 on the keyboard to assess what I've got so far. I'll go to my object mode and deselect. So that's pretty good. I could go a lot further with this, but for the sake of the tutorial, I want to get to the creating of the limbs so that we can put legs and a tail and ears on this. Now I'm going for one complete piece of geometry comprising this model because in the previous animation that you saw that introduced this tutorial, everything was one piece. Well, I've kind of roughed in the body now, and it's time to introduce some of the limbs. So I'll locate the polyfaces in which I want to extrude this. I'm going to use my edge loop tool, and I'll probably throw a loop in here, and that's going to allow me to extrude a front leg from this side and this side at the same time. So I'll right click and choose face. I'll select that face and the symmetrical one on the other side, and I'm going to click on my extrude tool. And if I leave my extrude tool to the setting that it's introduced in, I can now move the z-axis and I can start to extrude limbs on either side. Now I'm going to start to taper the limbs right away, so I'll click on the scale tool and I'll start to taper these so the legs can thin out. And I'll either click on the extrude tool on my shelf again or hit G on the keyboard to repeat the function. And I'm going to move this out. Now I want the legs to be a little flatter. Right now if I look straight on, they're a little bit above the ground. So in order to move those, I'm going to click on the blue dial that appears in the upper right hand corner of the extrude tool, and that will put my extrude tool in the middle, which means I can use my y-axis now to bring them up a little higher so they're more horizontal to the surface that the dog would be laying on. Now I'm ready to once again extrude. I'll hit G and I'll pull out another section, and I'm going to move this one up as well because I want the paws to be a little broader. So I'll click on the blue dial and I'll pull that up a little, and then I'm going to click on the blue dial again. I'll click on the scale function and I'll just make that a little wider. I'm going to hit 3 on the keyboard to see what I've got going here, so we can see what's starting to make those a little wider at the ends, where the paws would be a little wider than the ankles of this dog. I think I'll go ahead and add another poly face, and I guess I'll pull that one out as well. I'll return to the center, pull it up, and maybe I'll go back to the edges of my geometry by clicking on the dial. I'll click on the scale tool and I'll taper those in a bit like so. Now I can get to rough this in with some shapes, and then I could add more edge loops if I choose to. I think what I'll do now is I'm going to work on the paw and split it into 3 toes. So to do that, I'm going to be using the toolkit, and the toolkit is located in the upper right hand corner of your user interface. It appears to be a hammer with a cube, and in that toolkit I'm going to use the multi-cut tool, and I'm going to split this front surface into 3 sections. Now in order to introduce new faces, I need to decide where they're going to originate from. I wouldn't start just from here and go to here and then hit return and leave it like that, because if I hit 3 it would get kind of weird in the end. So I'm going to introduce these paths or these edges, and then I'm going to connect those edges to an intersecting series of vertices to keep the geometry smooth all the way around. And I'll go and I'll do the same thing underneath as well. Now let's see what we have here so far. Now I'm ready to extrude those toes. Now in order to do that, I'll shift select them, and I'm going to click on the extrude tool. But before I pull out the newly generated geometry, I'll center it, and I'm also going to turn off the keep faces together. And what that means is that I can go in now. I shall leave that right there. If I scale these now, you can see we've got separate pieces of geometry. So what I'll do is I'll just scale them so they're separate, pull them out just a little bit. And if I wanted to at this point, maybe I could just add another series of faces. I'll pull it out and maybe start to scale that. I'm going to center my extrude tool, and maybe I'll taper them. I'm going to hit 3 on the keyboard this time. You can see now I've got some toes there. Now once again, I'm modeling this quite quickly. You can take your time to get exactly what you want. I'll return to my object mode. I'm not going to do the other one because you saw how I did that one. We'll go ahead and we'll extrude the back legs much the same way. Then we'll make the ears and the tail. So I think I'm going to extrude the back legs from this polyface and to its symmetrical on the other side. I'll right click, choose face. I'll select both of them. Clicking on my extrude tool, I'll pull out on the z-axis the first set. And maybe the back legs are a little thicker up where the thighs would be. So maybe I'll keep it like that. Taper just a little bit using the scale tool. And I'll hit G on the keyboard, pulling out another one. Now once again, the legs are down below the ground level, so I'll center the extrude tool and pull it up on the y-axis. I'll go back to the edge because I want to start tapering this as well. So now I'll taper the foot like that. And I'll hit G one more time, pull out the next one, start to scale it out, perhaps where the paw might be. And I think I want one more. I'll hit G, pull it out a bit, and once again I'll taper it. I'll hit 3 on the keyboard to see what I've got so far. So you can see there are the back legs. Now if you were looking for more accurate anatomy, you would really have to work the thigh area a lot better, so maybe I'll just grab the edges here on either side, and with my move tool I'll just pull them out a little bit, and then maybe the back here as it meets the torso, and then I'll use my scale tool for that, and maybe I'll move it back a little. So this is all very subjective. These things that you would kind of work on as your design might dictate, or your own imagination might as well. I'll hit 3 on the keyboard. Now I've got the basic body. I would go around and do all the toes in some capacity, but I'm not going to do that because we've done more than that's all that's really necessary. Now the next part of this is I want to have the ears extruded as well. So I would locate a place from which I would like to do that from. So I guess what I'll do is I'm going to start to put the ears probably up in this area here. I'll return to the multi-cut, and once again I have to make sure that I'm going from intersection of vertices to intersection of vertices to define a shape that will maintain the smoothness of this head once we run the smooth or even use our proxy. So I'm going to start by clicking with it here. I'll come out here like so, and then maybe to here. I'll hit return, and I'm going to do the same thing on the other side of the head. And I could have done this from the top view, but perspective view seems to be all right as well. And I'm defining a rectangle flanked by these 2 triangles on either side. And what we're going to be able to do now is return to our move tool, right click and choose face. And I'm going to select these rectangles that we created with the multi-cut tool. And I'll hit my extrude tool, and I'll start to pull out the ears that I want. Now the ears usually get wider as they go away from the face, so I'm going to start to tip it, and I'll just scale it so they're wider. I'll hit G on the keyboard to get the next set up. And what I could also do is put the entire length I want up and get the general shape I want. And then I can now go to my edge loop tool, and with the edge loop tool I can start to introduce more geometry with which to refine this. It really it depends on what kind of ears you want your dog to have. And I'll hit 3 on the keyboard to see what I've got so far. And I might round off the tips a little bit. I'll put an edge loop up in this area. And then for each of these, I'll probably go in and grab the vertices here, and I'll just scale it in a bit. Maybe taper a tad, doing the same on the other side. And I'm going to hit 3 on the keyboard to see what I've got. I'll go back to my object mode. You can see that that's kind of a quick, easy workflow for generating a dog or any other quadruped animal, perhaps. Okay, so now let's get that tail going. I'll return to 1 on the keyboard. And now I want to define the area where the tail would come from. So it's probably going to come from this area down in here. So I probably will simply go in and throw an edge loop at this point down in this area. And I'll use this polygon face to extrude from. You'll notice that you get better results, quicker results if you keep the poly count low and just keep using that proxy to kind of assess how much geometry you need to add. And I think I'll pull up the entire length I want to begin with, and then I'll taper it at the top. Now I'll return to the edge loop, and the edge loop now I can start to put a bit of just a slight bend. I'm not putting much in because I'm going to let the actual deform animation bend the tail itself. So I'm really going to keep it probably pretty straight. I'm going to hit 3 on the keyboard, and I'll go to W, right click, and choose object mode. Alright, so this is what we've got for the body of our dog. Now if I was going to add to a nose to this, I would probably use a simple polygon sphere. So I'll go ahead and go to create polygon primitives and sphere, and I'll just click and drag a sphere in my viewport, and I'll start to go to my orthographic views to kind of line this up perhaps how I would like it to be inside of the body of our dog. Now if it's going to be a sleeping dog, maybe I want a reference for where the eye might be if the dog was actually dozing and the eyes were closed. I'm going to go to edge, and I think I want to put it kind of in this area, so I'm going to double click on this edge to select it, and I'll just move it forward a bit to give me a little more to work with. Maybe I'll get this one and put that forward too. I'll hit 3 on the keyboard. I'll return to 1, and I think what I'll probably do is I think I'll put the eyes right here and here. So I'm going to select those faces. I'll shift select both sides. Maybe I'll put them up just a little bit. And now I'm going to click on my extrude tool again. And just like the limbs, I'll pull it out so either side is doing the same. I'll taper it in a bit, round it off. I'm going to hit 3 on the keyboard to see what I have. It's often best to go back to your object mode and deselect so you can see how the light is actually affecting it. So I just want a bit of a shadow down here. I don't want the shadow on top, so I'll select it. I'll go back to 1 on the keyboard. And I think what I'll probably do now is use the toolbar, and I'm going to go to the target well, because if I go to the target well now, I can click here and I can snap that to there and essentially flatten that area out. I'll do the same on this side and that side. And I think what I'll probably do is go back to my vertices, and I think I might, or actually I think I'll select the edges. I'm going to select this edge and this edge, and I'm just going to scale them out a bit to accentuate that puffy closed eye. Perhaps I'll hit 3 on the keyboard, returning to my object mode and deselecting. Alright, so now you can see this is basically a very cartoony kind of a dog. Next, I'd like to put a mouth and a tongue coming out of that mouth on this pup. So I'll go to my side view, and in my side view I'm going to introduce a polygon torus, which is essentially that donut shape, and I'll just drop the shape in to get it started, and I'll put it off to the side. And I'm going to the attributes for this in the channel box, and under inputs I'm going to start to play with this to get the shape I want. First of all, I'd like it to be more of an ellipse, and then I'll scale it down to the size perhaps I kind of want here in relationship to the head. And now I'm going to play with the section radius to make it a little bit smaller. So I'll go in, and it's 0.5, so perhaps I'll make it 0.3. That looks pretty good. And now I'm going to move it over into position where I'd like it to be. I'll hit 4 on the keyboard, kind of working out the height perhaps and position of it here, maybe the scale a bit. And I'll go to my top view to make sure that it does peer outside on the side of the model. Now, this is obviously animated for a one view, 3/4 view perhaps from here, because logic would dictate the mouth wouldn't really be that way. So it's very cartoony in the approach to this little critter. So I've got the mouth kind of where I want it, and I'm going to put a couple of little teeth in there, and all I'll use to do that is a polygon cube. So I'll go to my top view, create polygon primitives cube, and I'll start to introduce that cube, jumping to my perspective view, giving it some height. I'm going to hit F on the keyboard so I can get on top of it. Now I want the tooth to taper at the bottom a bit, so I'm going to right click and choose vertexes. I'll grab it at the bottom. I'll get my scale tool, taper it just a bit, and I'm going to go around the perimeter and hit this with the polygon edge loop tool again to hold it together so I get a little bit of a roundness without compromising that rectangle shape. I'll hit 3 on the keyboard, go to my object mode maybe. So now we've got kind of a little tooth here, and I need to get that into the mouth and put the second one in. So I'll go to my top view to get started, hitting F on the keyboard to zoom in. And now I'll just rotate that, and I'm going to start to scale it there in relationship to the mouth. And now I'll return to the side view, hitting F and then perhaps 5. And I'll put it closer to what I want to position. Now I want to scale this without having to move it too much, so I'm going to move the pivot holding the D key and the V, and I'll snap it to the top of the geometry so that when I scale that now it stays kind of at the top of the mouth where I'd like it to be. Now I want 2 of these, so I'll hit Command D, W on the keyboard, and I'll move that to the side. I'm going to return my perspective view now, and now I want to make a little bit of a tongue that would come out of that mouth. And I'm going to use a polygon again. So I think what I'll probably do is I'll go to my top view, and I'll go to create polygon primitives, and I'll go to cube, and I'll drag a general shape that I want to start out with to get the length, returning to the perspective view to give it the width. Now I know it's got a bend, and I'll need to add geometry to do that, but I want it to taper just like the teeth. So once again I'll go to vertex, and I'll select just the back vertices, get my scale tool, tapered a little bit like that. And now I'm going to add a few of these edge loops in, trying to keep them evenly distributed. Since it's just going to have a color, it's not going to have a texture, it's not too critical that these lines be equidistant. And I think I'll put one last one here, and then I'll taper the very tip of the tongue by selecting the face and getting the scale tool. I'm going to hit 3 on the keyboard to see what I've got. So yeah, that's coming pretty good. I think I'll throw one more edge loop along the side of this shape, and then I'll get the scale tool and just taper it out so it rounds on the edges a little nicer. So now my objective is to get it into the mouth. So I'll go to my object mode, and I'm going to put the pivot at the tapered end by holding D and V, dragging on the x-axis. And I'm going to go to my top view now to get it a little closer to the general area of the mouth, because I want this to bend back, so I've got to do a little bit of that editing of that shape so that it appears to come out flatly from the opening and then turns to the side. So I'll just go and give it the height I want. And now I think what I'll do is I'll start to rotate some of these surfaces on the x-axis. So I'll go to vertex, and I'll select a few rows here. I'm going to hit B on the keyboard to get my soft select. And if I get my rotation now, you can see we're kind of rotating it where we want to and keeping it kind of straight where I want it to be straight where it comes out of the mouth. Now I want it to bend back that direction as well. So what I'll do now is deselect, and I'm going to select all the way back to here. I'm going to hold down D with my rotation tool having been selected, and I'll put this against the axis or the area of my geometry which I'd like it to rotate on the y-axis. And I'm going to reduce the soft select. So I'll double click on the tool of the toolbar, and under soft selection I can now reduce that fall off radius, and I can drag on that, or I can punch a specific number, and let's see what happens with it at, I think I'll just leave it at 0. Yeah, that's pretty good. And now I'm going to rotate it down this way as well, and I think I'll move it. So now when I put my bend tool on this, my nonlinear bend to animate it, this part will be left in position and just this will be affected. I probably will go in and tweak some of these Beziers here, so I'll hit W on the keyboard. I'm going to take the soft select off, and I'm going to select this area right in here. That looks a little troublesome. Get my rotation tool, and I'll just straighten that out a little, and I may even scale it a bit. Grab those, maybe move them up, and I'll hit 3 on the keyboard to see what I've got. So if we were to back up to see what our model looks like at this juncture, we can see we've got a lot of the working parts all ready to go and to be rigged to be animated.